Hello and welcome to this presentation about the proposed changes to the information sharing advice for practitioners providing safeguarding services to children, young people, parents and carers. This presentation is going to take you through what some of the proposed changes are within the document that are most going to impact school settings, providing you an opportunity to reflect upon what these might mean for you in your setting, and also to allow you an opportunity to respond to the consultation if you so wish. Just to note that this presentation is going to feature specific points that relate to school settings. So if you do work for another service area, then there may be other points within the consultation document that you may want to consider. The information sharing advice is non-statutory guidance to all services and professionals who work with children, young people and families. It contains principles and best practice in relation to sharing information in order to safeguard children and young people. So the first thing to be mindful about is that this is not a specific piece of guidance for school settings. And so as you read through the draft guidance, it's just worth bearing that in mind. The last substantive update to this guidance was in July 2018, and that reflected the changes to legislation with regards to the incoming UK GDPR legislation. And what we know is that this guidance is now not currently fit for purpose. It requires some significant changes to bring it up to date and to also incorporate some of the recommendations and learning from things like the independent review of children's social care. Because we sadly know that ineffective information sharing is often cited as a factor that impacts on the protection and the safety of children. So hence, this document is now getting a refresh. The information sharing advice is a document which should have synergy and should dovetail with working together to safeguard children, which is the overarching statutory guidance for safeguarding children in this country. Just as a note, working together to safeguard children is also going through a process of consultation right now. So there is an open consultation for this document, which you can also find on the government's webpage. So this non-statutory guidance should have synergy with the overarching statutory guidance. If you're interested in finding out more about working together to safeguard children, then please do have a look and book yourself on to the webinar that we are offering on the 20th of September. And you can book your place by going to safetraining.lgfl.net. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the consultation process around documents such as this draft guidance has been published and can be accessed through the link on the slide. So go and have a look at the draft guidance, and alongside that there is a summary document about the consultation questions that are being asked. So you have an opportunity to look at those questions and to respond to them to the government by the 6th of September. So if you want to make a response to this draft guidance, then please have a look at the link on the screen and follow the advice there. So just a note again, the consultation closes on the 6th of September. After that time, the responses to the consultation will be looked at and the guidance will be updated and then published later on in 2023 or perhaps into 2024. That timescale is still unknown. So if you've seen the information sharing advice before, you'll know that within it there are 7 golden rules for information sharing. That is the very foundation, it's the very core makeup of this guidance. And we still have those 7 golden rules for information sharing within this document. And what I've done here is I've just given you some information that's come from the government, and it says the 7 golden rules are designed to provide practitioners with a quick, straightforward guide on the core principles of timely and effective information sharing that can be applied to day-to-day decision making. They've been updated from the 2018 version of the information sharing advice. Whilst they contain similar subject matter to the previous version of the rules, the content has been reframed and aligns with changed advice relating to the legal framework. So that just gives you an overview. So the principles remain the same, but the description, the language within the document has changed. So let's go into those 7 rules. And what you'll see is on these series of slides, I've given you the previous rule that was in the previous iteration of this document in yellow, and then in green, you'll see the revised wording. So there are still 7 golden rules, but in my view, the language within the new rules is more explicit. It's trying to be a lot more accessible, to have a few more examples. So as you go through these 7 rules on each of these slides, have a think about, do you think the government are achieving what they set out to in terms of making it a lot more explicit? Do you think that these rules are memorable? Do you think there are enough examples in here that really help practitioners to take this guidance into their day-to-day practice? Is it helpful to therefore also hold others to account? So within these 7 golden rules, if we know that children's social care and our health colleagues are also following these rules, are these enough? Do they help you in perhaps thinking about how to challenge others, how to dispute others' decision making? So bear that in mind as you go through these slides. So with the first golden rule, it's trying to be much more explicit with regards to how sharing of safeguarding concerns trumps a person's right to privacy, and to try and make it absolutely clear to practitioners that if you have a concern about a child who is experiencing or who's likely to experience harm, you must report this. And sadly, we often hear about tragic cases where poor information sharing has contributed to children who have experienced harm or indeed much worse. And so it's important that in school settings, we are passing on those concerns as quickly as we possibly can to the relevant agencies where we are worried about a child perhaps experiencing abuse or harm. So does this rule help you? Does the change in terminology help you? And be thinking about, how would I get this information across to my staff team? So would you need to deliver different training? How would you get across these 7 rules? How would you put them into practice? The second rule here is about how we should always, wherever possible, work with parents and carers. So if possible, we should be open and honest with parents and carers from the outset about the concerns that we have related to the child or the children, because only then, if we're working with openness and transparency, are we actually going to affect change within those families. And plus, relationships with parents should always be built on honesty and transparency. However, what we know is that that isn't always possible, that we sometimes need to share information relating to safeguarding without the information being passed to families first. And the example for this second golden rule goes into a bit more detail about why we might not be sharing information with the family first. So again, is this information helpful clarification for you and your teams within a school setting? Is there anything that you think could be better? So this third rule goes into a bit more explicit detail about how you don't need consent to share personal information in relation to a perceived risk of harm. So whereas before it started out saying wherever possible you should get consent from parents or carers, it's starting out this new golden rule by saying you don't need consent. That where you have a safeguarding concern and you are promoting the welfare of the child or young person, you do not need consent. However, it does remain good practice to ensure transparency wherever possible and to inform the child and the carers that you are sharing that information. So it's almost flipped it on its head with this golden rule. We're starting out by saying you don't need consent. Of course, it's great to get it and to, again, work in the air of transparency and openness, but you don't need consent to share concerns relating to a child who might be experiencing abuse or neglect. The fourth golden rule is about seeking advice when you are unsure about whether you should be sharing information or not. So it talks about the same kind of things as it did before about seeking advice, making that advice prompt, seeking that advice promptly, and also making sure that you understand the legal framework. So it's no good to just assume that you can or you can't share information, that staff really do need to understand the legal basis upon which they can share that information if they're doing so. And it talks about who you might be speaking to in your organisation. So it might be your data protection officer, you might be turning to them for advice. But I guess one thing for schools to consider is, who is that nominated person? Is that clear within your policies and procedures? And do staff seek advice? So what's the evidence to suggest that this is happening? If it's not, then what are you going to do to ensure that this is then taken forward into practice within your school? Golden rule number 5. The wording of this one has changed quite a lot, actually, and I think for the better. So the wording previously, as you can see in the orange box, I felt was a bit ambiguous. And in the green, you can see the new text. So it's trying to be a lot more explicit about the need to protect whistleblowers and others when sharing information. So if there is a risk of harm to those people, then their identity should not be disclosed. So it's making it clear what we need to consider in terms of safety and well-being of people involved or connected to the concern that we have. Rule 6 goes into how we should be sharing information that is relevant and accurate with individuals, agencies and organisations, and that we need to be really careful not to overshare. So again, similar to the principles that we had in here before in the 2018 version, but it just goes into a little bit more detail. Again, thinking, is this explicit enough for you? Would you like to see other examples in here, or would you like further clarification about this point in particular? And finally, rule number 7. So the need to keep a record of your decision and the reasons for it. And within the new wording, you can see that it's also elaborated this further, that it's not just recording the reason for sharing information, but also the reason for not sharing information. And you need to be really clear about your rationale and the legal framework that you've used to make that decision. And as a result of this, we should see better accountability, but also that should enable better challenge between agencies if we're very explicit and clear about why we are or why we are not sharing information. So again, what do you think about this? Is this helpful? Is the added language going to be useful for you in a school setting? And again, what might you need to do to upskill your staff in understanding this particular rule? So outside of the 7 rules that we've just been through, there are some other points to think about. So the layout of the document has changed. So if you are familiar with the 2018 version, you'll see that the 2023 version is now in what I would say is a Q&A format, is now in a question and answer format. And that's to, again, try and make it more accessible to practitioners reading it. There is also on pages 8 and 9 more information and clearer definitions about consent. And the reason for this is because we know that sometimes practitioners do not share information because they feel they can't, because they haven't got consent from a parent, carer or a child. So the information on pages 8 and 9 of the document are trying to make it much clearer about what consent is and whether you need it or not. And then further, we've got in Annex A from page 17, more detailed information about data protection so that we as practitioners are clearer about the legal framework that we use to decide whether we can or we should not share information. And also what I would say is quite a helpful definitions table to really unpick and understand some of those acronyms and some of the terminology that we use around information sharing. And on page 12, worth noting that there are some different emphases, I would say, to practitioner responsibilities. And again, these come out of the serious case reviews, the child safeguarding practice reviews, and also some of the learning from the independent review of children's social care. And the summary of those practitioner responsibilities are about sharing information as promptly, as quickly, as early as possible, to seek support when uncertain about when, what, and how to share information. So going back to one of those golden rules earlier, about speaking to your DPO or whoever it is within your school about whether you should be sharing information, what you should be sharing, etc. Providing feedback to agencies who have shared information with you. So if somebody comes forward and shares some information about a child and they're expecting you to do something with that information, making it clear to that agency what you have done as a result. So that two-way ongoing communication and relationship that's being built between agencies is hoped to improve information sharing on the whole. And the fourth point there is about making sure that as a school you have information sharing protocols and agreements in place with key agencies that you are likely to share information with regularly. So the most obvious of which is children's social care. So do you have an information sharing protocol or agreement in place? Do you know what that says? Do you know where to find it? It might be worth just looking out for those documents again and being clear on the contents of those. So just a few things then to wrap up and to consider for yourself. So are you going to respond to this consultation? Would you like to give DfE your feedback about it? If you do, then go onto the link that was on the first slide, follow the instructions and provide your feedback as required. And that has to be given by the 6th of September. Then think about what are the potential training implications for staff when this final document is published. So how are you going to make this practical? How are you going to make it accessible to staff? How are you going to give examples of those 7 principles, those 7 golden rules? So it might be that you want to think about some case studies or some exemplars that really bring to life some of those 7 golden rules, because it's only then that we're going to see them actually put into place in practice. Do you have or do you know about the data sharing protocols that are in place between your school and other key agencies? So that might be a bit of a task that you want to undertake over the next few months, is have a look at what protocols are in place, which protocols are missing, who might you need to speak to about that? Do you know and do you have evidence that your staff know who to talk to if they're unsure about sharing information? So perhaps that's something that you're going to need to make clearer in training. Maybe it's something that you're going to want to provide an update about in upcoming staff meeting. And how are you going to evidence that staff do come forward and that they do go to the right person, the relevant person within your organisation, and seek advice where necessary and where appropriate? And lastly, what are the implications of this draft guidance for your policies? Now, obviously, there still might be some changes to this document. It's a consultation document, so DfE might take away people's comments, people's feedback and change it. But as it is at the moment, what might be some of the implications for you to think about in terms of your policy? So how might it impact on your safeguarding and child protection policy? What might need to change within that? And also any policies that you have in place relating to information sharing and GDPR, how might they need to change as well? So it's good to be ahead of the curve. It's good to be kind of having this in mind for what you're going to need to change when the final document is indeed published. We hope you found that useful. There is lots more available from the Safeguarded team at LGfL. So do have a look at these key links if you're not familiar with us and all the amazing free support, advice and training that we offer to schools. And very lastly, if you haven't already, do come along and hear about the proposed changes to working together to safeguard children at the webinar that we are delivering on the 20th of September at 3:30. So working together is the overarching statutory guidance that we need to understand and that will feed into keeping children safe in education. So if you're not up to speed, if you're not familiar with that document and what the proposed changes are, then come along to that webinar, book your place at safetraining.lgfl.net. And we do hope to see you again soon.